If you're watching this, something terrible has happened. What's up, nerds? Welcome back. Thank you for joining me yet again for another video. Today we're going to discuss one of the most rewarding, but also daunting and potentially dangerous types of photography: wildlife. Wildlife photography is one of the most alluring types of photography for beginners because animals like birds and deer are practically everywhere once you set foot outside your door, but I see a lot of new photographers taking blurry photos of an animal's butt that's halfway behind a tree. So in this video, I want to give you a few quick tips that you can practice in the field that will take your wildlife photography from good to amazing. So first, the disclaimer. These are wild animals, living creatures who survive in the wilderness. That means that some of them literally kill other animals to survive, which very much means that you are an eligible candidate to become dinner at any time. So please act accordingly. Even when photographing herbivores, keep in mind that they are prey, and so the majority of animals that approach them are, of course, predators. If you're looking at a beautiful elk or deer, the only reason it's still alive is because of its ability to avoid predators and defend itself from threats. As an example, the deadliest animal in North America is the moose. They look like giant, floppy-nosed stuffed animals, but they absolutely will kill you if they feel threatened. There are no amounts of social media likes that will justify getting stomped to death by an animal that looks like this. That is embarrassing. Can you imagine the eulogy at your funeral if you got killed by an animal that looks like an oversized quadruped version of Alf? Do not put your mom through that. So with that out of the way, tip number one, familiarize yourself with the animal you want to photograph. This means, where does it live? What does it do during different seasons? Will you find it high on rocky cliffs, or will it be down low in marshy wetlands? Does it migrate seasonally or stay fairly local? With this information, you'll be able to get yourself into position to find the animals, but it's also important to familiarize yourself with the animal's actual behavioral patterns as well. I had a friend text me a while back because he figured out where a local black bear was going to forage for berries, but he was planning on posting up in that area to get some shots. And I cannot stress enough how profoundly dangerous it is to get between a bear and its food source. And thankfully this friend knew that, but with that knowledge of where the bear was going, he was able to safely position himself near the food so the bear didn't feel threatened, but he was able to safely observe from a distance and capture some really amazing images of the bear as it enjoyed a snack. Knowledge is absolutely your best ally in wildlife photography, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to be prepared before you get into the field. You won't have time to Google techniques for surviving a charging moose when it happens. You have to leave your house prepared with the knowledge and the techniques to avoid the situation where the moose ever charges in the first place. And you should also be prepared with the knowledge of what to do if all else fails and you do find yourself staring down the barrel of a 1,400-pound furry freight train. Tip number two, you need a decent lens. I generally hate the implication that good photography comes from good gear, but this is one of the most common questions I get about this, and truly, wildlife photography is one of the only subsets of photography where gear actually really does matter. You want a camera with good autofocus capabilities, decently fast burst speeds to capture the action, and enough resolution that you can crop in if needed during editing. Lots of times when photographing fast-moving animals, I'll intentionally compose my images with a little extra breathing room so that I can be sure to capture the entire animal, and then I'll crop in later for the composition I really want. There's nothing more disappointing than getting beautiful lighting conditions with a great animal and then accidentally cutting off its feet or its tail because you're trying to compose too tight and it moves slightly out of frame. This does not mean that you have to have the newest and best camera on the market. People have been taking incredible wildlife images for decades, so even old cameras will still be great. You just want to make sure that the camera has decent autofocus and decent resolution. However, for wildlife photography, the lens is truly the most important part of the puzzle. As I said before, you never want to be too close to the animals you're photographing, both for safety and so that you can capture the animal's natural behavior. If you're too close, you're going to be impacting how it behaves, and you're going to get less authentic photos. So a long-range telephoto lens will be your best friend. I live and die by the 400mm f2.8 and the 600mm f4 prime lenses because they're incredibly fast and incredibly sharp. But if you don't have the budget for those, which is extremely understandable, a high quality zoom like a 100 to 400 or a 200 to 600 is an excellent substitute. They're half the weight and 20% the cost of the big boys. Of course, the trade-off is smaller aperture, which means it lets in less light, but it has the added benefit of being much more versatile for composition and much more portable for travel. My absolute perfect wildlife setup is two bodies, one with the 600mm prime and another with a 100 to 400mm. This gives you a lot of flexibility, so you're covered for almost every focal length that will be useful from a safe shooting distance, and you won't have to mess around with changing lenses to adjust your composition. I've missed way more shots than I want to remember because the animal walked towards me and I needed to change lenses to keep them in frame. So having two bodies with different focal lengths is my favorite way to approach it. Tip number 3, sounds obvious, focus on quality lighting. Like basically all nature photography, this means either early morning, late afternoon, or soft overcast days. While we don't generally like flat gray clouds for landscape photography, for wildlife photography it can work really nicely. Again, going back to the portrait analogy, a cloudy day turns the entire sky into a softbox. Clouds diffuse the light and they create a beautiful, subtle glow on your subject. Now, of course, golden hour light feels overly obvious, but it actually creates a lot of potential diversity depending on the angle of the sun relative to your subject. My personal favorite is backlit like a Hollywood glamour shot, but don't shy away from a front-lit subject either. I try to avoid a fully front-lit subject because it tends to look flat, but you can get away with it if there's a ton of dramatic action to keep the photo interesting. But even front-lit, with the sun offset just enough to create shadows, you can end up with beautiful lighting from almost any angle as long as the sun is low in the sky. One of my favorite phrases is light illuminates and shadow defines. I think it's the most perfect way to describe natural lighting. All light and the image looks flat. All shadow, and again, the image looks flat. But as long as both light and shadow are present in the photo, in almost any ratio, you are well on your way to a dramatic and engaging wildlife photo. Tip number 4, body posture. I have seen 10,000 photos of a deer or elk butt facing away from the camera and grazing. It's more or less the default setting for any ungulate, and it's uninteresting because every person who has ever seen an elk or deer has seen that behavior. A photo of the animal walking or looking into the camera, sparring with another bull, bugling. Those are interesting photos. We want behavior that shows who the animal is. It shows the animal behaving like a wild animal, and those are the actions that make it interesting. Same thing goes for birds. Sitting in a tree branch is somewhat interesting, but a shot of the bird flying over your head is astonishingly boring, and it feels a little amateur because that's the perspective that every human on Earth sees a bird from basically every time we see a bird. So no matter how nice your gear is, that photo will always feel like a snapshot. Instead, try to capture the bird in flight, preferably from a level plane. This makes the viewer feel like they're flying alongside the bird, like you're not viewing a photograph, but rather participating in the action. It makes the photo much more engaging. Of course, takeoffs and landings also tend to photograph very well because it's a dynamic action, and the added bonus is that it often occurs close to the ground, which is where humans live, so it's much easier to get a nice angle on the shot. If the action you're shooting isn't action, like actively hunting or fighting or even sprinting, but just body posture, that's great. You can tell an incredible story from an animal simply existing in their natural environment. A stationary animal can have power if it's in a powerful stance, either making eye contact with the camera or standing strong and proud. If the animal's walking, try to get one foot in the air to show motion, and I always prefer to try and get the front foot on the far side of the animal so the shoulders are open towards the camera. As an example, take a look at these two shots of a polar bear. It's the same animal taken half a second apart. Notice the image on the left has open shoulders and the one on the right is closed off. The open shoulders feel more powerful and the photo is more engaging because it creates a subconscious sensation that the bear is stalking rather than just standing. Differences in body posture like that are very subtle, but they play a major role in the audience's perception of the photo because they play off our subconscious primal instincts about body language. You have to remember, we are previously wild animals as well, so all of that is ingrained in your viewer's brain and they will subconsciously realize and interpret that body language as they view your images. Tip number 5, think about your position in relation to the animal and their body posture. For terrestrial animals like bears, moose, elk, alligators, what have you, close to eye level, if not lower, really accentuates the power and dominance of a creature that size. Shooting from an elevated position will look like you're in a zoo, and it will greatly detract from the image. Get low, even if that means laying down on your stomach to shoot up at the animal and create a super immersive frame. But quickly going back to tip number 1 about safety, if your subject is a carnivore like a bear, please don't lay down on your stomach and put your eye to the viewfinder unless you have a friend with you who can be a spotter. For birds, as I said before, try to capture them from a level angle. A wildlife photo taken from eye level is always more immersive. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule, but as a new wildlife photographer looking to improve, this is probably the easiest change you can make to dramatically improve your shots in very little time. If you liked these tips and you find them helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel for more, and it's profoundly helpful to me if you'd consider clicking like and dropping a comment below as well. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and stay nerdy.